some of us had the good fortune of really knowing him, meeting him personally, and in my own case, at the age of 12, sharing a stage with him at the Odubua Hall of the Obafemi Awolowo University in 1983. At that time, I was a young boy, 12 years old, leading a musical youth band called Midwaves. And in one of the shows where we were performing, the great Fela was also performing. And because my father was schoolmates and classmates with Fela in Abeokuta Grammar School, and at their first time when they set up a band together, and my father was the guitarist, and they would skip from the stories, they would skip the fence and go into town in the evenings. So when my manager at that time, Dr. Babayemi Topsy, heard the story of how the fact that my father and Fela were very close friends, he decided to take me to Fela, and of course at the mention of my father's name, you know, the great icon, the great legend stood up, hugged me, and you know, just chatted briefly with me, but it felt like I was there forever. So today is a special day for me to be here at Celebration. It's my first time of being here. But today is also a very special day for Africa. Because 73 years ago, on this very same day, October 15, in a little hotel in Manchester, 90 young men and women gathered together in that hotel, and they were there for about 6 days, between the 15th of October and the 21st of October. And nothing really much was written about that particular meeting, but it was a meeting that was going to change the world, at least for Africa, the way that they knew it. At that meeting, there were people like Kwame Nkrumah. There were people like Kamuzu Banda, Hastings Banda, before he changed his name to Kamuzu Banda. There were people like Jomo Kenyatta, who were in that room. And of course, there were people like Obafemi Awolowo, who were also at what was called the 5th Pan-African Congress. And it was the 5th Pan-African Congress that history bears as the core trigger, where 90 young people decided that it was time for them to take back their future from the hands of colonialists who had made them second-class citizens in their own countries. And even though the meeting was happening in Manchester, United Kingdom, because the colonialists took them for granted, I guess in the words of Showere, they called them inconsequential. And so, at one point or the other, they didn't even do anything about it until it was literally too late. 15 years later, but 24 of the African countries had already positioned, and many of them had already entered into independence based on one meeting that took place 73 years ago. So, if you look at it, in 1945, when that meeting took place, Obafemi Awolowo, who was born in 1909, was 36 years old. Kwame Nkrumah, who was also born in 1909, was also 36 years old. These were the guys who were taking a decision for their continent. These were the guys who were challenging the status quo. They didn't have money, they didn't have pedigree, they barely had an education. I mean, Obafemi Awolowo literally had just graduated, I believe in 1944, from law. So this was fresh graduates. If there was NYSC in the United Kingdom, he would have been an NYSC, he would have been a youth corps at the age of 36. But we must remember they were young, and they were visionary, and they had no prior experience in governance, but they had a vision. they had an idea that their country was better than it was the way that they had been born into it. That their people deserved better than being second-class citizens in their own nation. And they had come to a common understanding that they were a generation that was born for liberation. They had come to a common understanding that they were a generation that had the divine mandate to liberate their own people and to give freedom to their children. And they worked hard at it. They worked across board. They were united across tribe. They were united across religion. They were united across social barriers. They came together within their countries, and even then, even when one of them or the other would get independence, they would not stop until all of them got independence. Because they understood the power of unity in overcoming every great challenge. And so, for Nigeria, the success story was that on Saturday, the 1st of October, 1960, Sir Tafawa Balewa, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, stood on the podium and read his independence speech as the first Prime Minister of the Federation of Nigeria. Now, you must remember that Abubakar Tafawa Balewa himself was born in 1912. So as at when he was reading the speech as the leader of Nigeria, he was 48 years old. That is how old I will be next year when I'm reading my presidential inauguration speech. So a 48-year-old man was okay to lead Nigeria. And for those of you who would please Google it if you haven't already seen it, I think one of the most important things that we can ever watch is a USIS video of a visit of Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa to the United States on July 25, 1961, barely 9 months after he read his Independence Day speech. And when you watch that video, there are many emotions that will well up in you, because essentially you would see how America and Americans came out to honor a man and his team who couldn't even afford to fly in on their own country's presidential jets. And whilst Abubakar Tafawa Balewa and his entourage flew in on the presidential jet of the United States of America, they were met at the airport by the Vice President, Lyndon Johnson. They were met by the Secretary of State and a delegation of great statesmen from the United States. These were the people who were meeting young men under the age of 50. And why did they treat us with so much pomp and pageantry? Because they were looking at these young men and they could see hope. Not only hope for a nation, but hope for a continent. They didn't see a rich country. Our first oil well, as many of you know, was drilled in 1959. This was barely a year and a half after the first oil well was drilled. They didn't see an oil-rich country. They just saw a nation reflecting a continent where young people had decided to take their future in their own hands and were able to organize themselves in unity across everything that the colonialists had used to divide them and rule them. And they were able to come together and overcome and achieve their goal. And that was what the world was celebrating. And the world had great hopes for Nigeria. The world had great hopes for Africa. And many of you know, over time, those hopes have been dashed. Those hopes are almost being buried. Not just by the world, but even by the people of Africa ourselves. So sometime in the course, less than 4 years or so after, a group of military boys decided to overtake him. And the interesting thing is that since they overtook, they come block the road so that nobody will come to overtake them. But a new generation has come to overtake the overtakers. Some of those who are still alive today include General Gowon from that particular generation, who took over the reins of power at the age of 31. And under his own watch, on the 24th of March, 1971, the year that I was born, 1 Nigerian pound exchanged for $3 US.
Very true.
So if you took 100 Nigerian pounds to the Bureau de Change, you will get 300 United States dollars for 100 Nigerian pounds under the leadership of a young man. And then, even amongst themselves, they were still overtaking. And it turned out that by 1976, a young general by the name of Olusegun Obasanjo, under circumstances obviously not very pleasant at that time, took over the reins of power, and he took over 2 weeks before his 39th birthday. So Obasanjo was 38 years old when he became head of state. 2 weeks later, he became 39. And at the year that Obasanjo took over, 1976, on the same day as I just quoted to you, March 24, 1 Nigerian naira was exchanging for $1.33. Meaning that if you took 1 naira to the Bureau de Change, you would get 133 US dollars. And then over time, Obasanjo handed over. And then the military took over again. And at one point in time, our current president, then General Muhammadu Buhari, took over on the 31st of December 1983, 2 weeks after his own 41st birthday. So by the time General Buhari took over the reins of power in Nigeria, I today am 47 years old. That is, I'm 6 years older than Buhari when he took over as head of state. As you know the story, over time, the age of the leaders grew older and older and older. And by 2006, when they were playing the musical chairs, they brought Obasanjo back again. Of course, that came in 1999, and Obasanjo was there till 2007. In 2006, on the same day, March 24, this is 30 years after Obasanjo's first experience as state. Remember what I said to you. In 1976, March 24, whilst Obasanjo was head of state, 1 naira was $1.33. By 2006, now Obasanjo being president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, on the same day, $1 is now exchanging for 133 naira. Meaning that as Obasanjo grew older, okay, not maybe him, but as the leadership of Nigeria grew older, our currency grew weaker. So perhaps it will come to a point in time when we will be able to reverse the trend concerning the strength of our currency as we fix our economy, when younger people will once again take the reins and the statesmanship of this country, and we would lead Nigeria to our glory times again. But because these ones that have become older have refused to step aside, they will need to be overtaken. But they will need to be overtaken by a generation, because they didn't come in as one, they came in as a generation. So it will not be one Eunice or one Fela or one Showore that will be able to get this thing done. It's going to be a collaboration of Eunice and Fela and Shore to bring to pass the kind of thing that we need to do. So I serve notice to the older generation. This generation have refused to learn, and teacher, please don't come and teach us nonsense. Because we cannot learn democracy from those who do not know democracy.
Oh yes.
So I bring my thoughts towards a close. All across Africa, God has blessed a continent beyond just beyond description. There are many studies that have shown that the resources that are required by the world to survive in the 21st century, 60% or so of those resources actually lie in the continent of Africa. We know that Nigeria is a specially blessed nation with mineral resources, natural resources, and human resources. But we have not been able to live out the fullness of our potential for a very simple reason. We have not really experienced leadership. We have experienced rulership, but not leadership. Because what rulers do is rulers amass subjects, but leaders inspire followers. Rulers suppress and oppress their subjects, but leaders impress their followers and release them to do great things. And so whilst we have been subject to military rule for much of the last 54 or so, or 50-something years, we have to understand that the time has come when military rule must step aside, whether in military uniform or civilian garment, but military rule must step aside for a new generation of people, great leaders, to take over. Now let me quickly say something as I close. That there are certain cycles that you cannot explain. But for those who are very spiritual in nature, they would say things like time and chance happen to them. So on December 12, 1959, Nigeria had its first general elections that produced eventually the government that led Nigeria on October 1st, 1960. But it was December 1st to December 12, 1959 that those general elections took place. 20 years after, in 1979, there was another shift. This time from military rule to civilian rule. And 20 years after, in 1999, there was another election. And another shift. This time from military rule to military ruler in civilian clothes. So 20 years after the first election, there was a shift. 20 years after that, there was another shift. Well, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as I bring my thoughts to a close, I want to remind you, 20 years after 1999 is 2019. And there will be another shift. This time from military rulers in civilian clothes to truly democratic civilians who will lead Nigeria back to the path of greatness. I believe that it will take a generational collaboration. It will not just be a collaboration amongst candidates and aspirants, it will be a collaboration amongst the people. It will be a generation of people who refuse to be divided by party, who refuse to be divided, and who refuse to fight themselves. It will be a generation of people who will clap for everyone that represents their generation, regardless of whether they are in their party or not. Some people have been tackling me and saying, why is it that you are always celebrating other people? Well, Showere has celebrated me. Why should I not celebrate Showere? Eunice has Sister Tejide has celebrated me, why should I not celebrate her? We need to help this older generation know that the time of old, bitter competition amongst rivals is over. It is now time for better collaboration amongst the generation. The greatness of Nigeria is at hand, and it will emerge. And I want to congratulate all of you who are here today. And I pray that you would live to see Nigeria, the greatness of Nigeria will come back again, so that everything that Fela fought against will become not just a song, but an experience. And I said I was going to do something. So you permit me, I've wanted to do it for a long time. And it is to do something that I did many years ago. And to sing a little part of Fela's songs. So if you know it, you will sing it with me, and then I'll hand over the microphone. All the wahala, all the problems, all the things where we think say who do for this world is that. Where the teacher, school boy and school girl jam together. Who be teacher? I go let you know. Who be teacher? I go let you know. When we be picking, when we day for school, when we day university, when we start to walk, who be government teacher? Now the problem side of teacher students, we will talk about too. God bless you guys. Thank you.
Another round of applause for this one. Well, Fela has reminded us of how we can get to the land of promise. We went down memory lane to let us know that our Nkrumah and all those Pan-Africanists that will remember fondly by their tactics when they seized the gauntlet and liberated their countries. So those who would want us to believe that and Aminu Waziri Tambuwal at 52 years is too young. They need to have their heads scrambled and reset to factory setting. Because it is only in our country that people who reason in this manner. A 53-year-old man too young to leave this country. How old is Macron? Everyone appears to be leaving Nigeria behind. The world is going back to electing young leaders. But for some of us, including shamefully the young people, we think our salvation lies in antiquated humans walking the face of the earth. You know why I call them antiquated? Because their ideas have no place in today's world. The ideas are old and have no place in today's world. And that's the message that Fela Drotoye eloquently brought to us today. But I want to remind you that we should not just listen and clap. We should invite the message. And I've always said that young people have a weapon that they refused to use. You have the weapon. There are more younger people in Nigeria than old people. There are more young people in Nigeria than old people. If we would take politics seriously, if we will not just busy ourselves, just listening to music, watching telenovelas, if we will take seriously the matter of our state, if we take seriously getting our PVCs and taking an active part in determining those who will rule us, honestly, young leaders will emerge in our country. Maybe you think that it can't happen, but it will happen. Women, for example, if you know that in Kano, a woman won direct primaries to the House of Reps. Women have been repressed over the years in the North, not allowed to offer themselves to be voted for. But the day women unite, because they are easier to mobilize on election day than men, the day women unite that they want to rule the country, honestly, they have the voting strength. All of these people that we routinely elect, who go there simply to turn Nigeria to a buffet, I'm telling you that that time will come when they will be replaced by the right people. I know some of us are not religious, so I can't hear amen. So, one takeaway from this paper presented by Fela Drotoye is the need for generational collaboration. As a people, we need to collaborate. As a generation, we need to collaborate. I'll be more excited if a young man like Fela leads my country. I'll be very proud. Wherever he speaks, I will say, yes, this is my leader. A leader that I can be proud of. You see now, when Uhuru Kenyatta, when he begins to speak, you see the pride with which Kenyans listen. That's the way it should be. And Nigeria is not in short of the bright people who can truly make us proud, provide the right leadership, lead us competently. I'm confident that we'll get there one day, but we must work at it. So I want to bring on the representative of OBA Ezekwesili, Mr. Tuji Lando.
First of all, apologies, Obi is not here.
Why?
Why has a long tail? I have to go an extremely short notice. Not a real time. Can we have one house? Can we politely just have one house? Thank you. So I got a call on Saturday saying that she'll not be able to attend and I should step in for her. And so I hastily presented preparations, but I'm here. But I think also destiny has a hand in ensuring that I'm here. This is one of those happenstances where you could not have planned it. Here I am celebrating Fela, and anybody who understands and knows my own history with Fela. Okay, so thank you. Is this better now? All right, in that case, everybody say yeah, yeah. Everybody say yeah, yeah. And as a nod to my brother there, very grudgingly, I come a very long way with Fela, and I don't want to start talking about my own
own history with Fela. Everybody has their own notional narratives about it. But suffice to say that Fela rented my father's nightclub, Afro Sport, and this is 30, 40 years ago. So I grew up listening to Fela and, you know, really being indoctrinated by Fela. So like I was saying, my own presentation here is basically my own summation of the theme for today, which is African leadership in the millennium. And I know it's such a poor substitute because you're all waiting for Obi. And of course, how do you top Fela's rousing presentation? But I think there's something valid that I might want to contribute to this conversation here. I'm particularly pleased that they picked up on the sub-theme of overtake, trying to overtake. And the question now becomes, within the context of Africa, leadership, millennium, how can we overtake this generation? That's one question I'm going to leave hanging out there. The other thing that is also clear is that even as we speak about Africa, there's a slight nod and deference to Nigeria, basically, because as the organizer has mentioned, this is an election year. Oftentimes, in the public discourse space, we wonder if Africa is indeed a country or a continent. Oftentimes, you know, when we're reading the critique of the West, we all homogenize into one unit called Africa as if there are no points of differentiation. And so sometimes we fight that Africa is not a country, as the West would like us to believe that Africa is indeed a continent with varied interests, varied history, but a collective sense of destiny. So by turns, Africa can both be a country and a continent. And it's within these two framings that I'm going to direct my presentation. Obviously talking about Africa as a continent, but also more importantly talking about Africa represented by Nigeria as a country. So the question of leadership is basically at the heart of this now, as we enter the 21st century. There are some statistics I gleaned, you know, this morning, as a matter of fact, I thought would provide some kind of statistical background as to what it is we are challenged with. Because you can't solve problems if you cannot measure them. In March this year, in Rwanda, there was the emergence of what is called the Africa Single Market. That finally, after Kwame Nkrumah in 1957 said Africa must unite, after Fela sang about African unity, there is actually the basis for a formalized single market for the continent. And that is a very big plus. It's taken us from 1960 to 2018, 58 years, to get to a point where we realize that our strengths actually lie together. We're stronger together as Africans. The other thing that comes out of that is the statistics that shows that there's a growing African middle class. By some estimates, by 2030, there'll be 500 million Africans with about $2 trillion worth of spending power. And 2030 is just what? Another 10 years barely? So there's something to be said about, in spite of the negative outliers of governance, I mean, and the dinosaurs my friend was referring to, places like Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Uganda. And I'm going to go back to Uganda for one particular point I want to make. Africa is actually moving quantitatively in terms of the economics of it. But it's an uneven development. In terms of the demographics, it is expected that by 2030, there will be 320 million Africans, young Africans within the age group of, I think, 15 to 24. So Africa is resourced on multiple levels. Somebody mentioned that Africa has perhaps 60% of the global resources that will be needed to power the entire planet in this new millennium. Africa also has, perhaps also in the same parity, 60% of the youthful population, the human capital that is essential, that is really at the core of our own value proposition on this global world space. So Africa is a very young continent in spite of the predations of these dinosaurs. And it's important for us to realize that we do have a future both in material resources, but more importantly, in the human resources. The question now becomes, how do we harness both? Those are the challenges of leadership in the new millennium. And it might not be very clear as we ponder our own state of affairs, with Africa, quote unquote, being a country, / Nigeria, where we're going in that. It's instrumental that at this point, in a country where the median age, I think, is 17, the two top political parties are fielding candidates in their 70s. What we have to understand is step back and look at it again. What we're witnessing is the end of a cycle. What we're witnessing is the end of a cycle. My own phrasing is the class of 66, the guys who took over, but basically created what I call the military political complex, in which they created a system in which they've captured the state from 1966 thereon, with the active conspiracy of politicians, ethnicists, and generally a ruling class that is predatory, venal, corrupt, all the wonderful names you can call them. But they sit on top of Nigeria's future. They're a very small sliver of people, perhaps no more than 2 million people, who have access to 80% of the resources. So these are kind of the bare bones facts that we're contending with. I also want to talk about human resources as a counter to this narrative of oil. It is not about oil anymore. The value of oil percentage of our GDP has diminished over the last, I think last quarter is about 8.2%. So oil itself is not really where our wealth is. It's in the formal sector, in the growing informal sector, in farming, agriculture, in small services, the mom and pop shop, the woman who sells akara. Those are the people that constitute the backbone of the engine of growth in Nigeria. The other major chunk is the Nigerian diaspora. All the repartees, all the Nigerians overseas who send in at least, I think by last account, $25 billion a year, come in from Nigerians living in the diaspora. So we have to step back and look at it and challenge the dominant narrative that oil is everything. No, oil is what services the graft machine, which is the Nigerian state. And that oil is what services the 2 million people that are fighting for political power, who form the ruling elite. What our political presidential candidates are fighting for now is how do we wrest control of the state, because it has been captured thoroughly, both at the sub-national levels in the state governments and at the very national level at the federal government. And those are the large existential challenges that we have to consider as we consider the issue of leadership. The thing about the future of Africa's leadership is that it is anchored on 2 or 3 things. One I would like to share with you is, again, going back to the demographics. Nigeria's demographics is just atrocious. I think there was a report that now says it's widely circulated, I think about 87 million people living in destitution. How can a country be so rich and yet so poor? Nigeria is a rich country full of poor people. That paradox is what we have to challenge. And those are the challenges before my presidential aspirants here now. Those are the real issues. The real issue is not whether Atiku can visit the US or whether Buhari has 150 cows or not. And this is where this very wily group of people have misdirected us. It's almost like one of those Professor Pella tricks. The more you look, the less you see. Oh, changer, Baba changer. They've shifted attention from what is the core challenge of this country. How do we take care of these young people? How can you have a country where 10.4 million children are out of school? It's unconscionable. I mean, I can't say this thing without my eyes welling up. I cannot honestly, because it's an emotion. It's an emotional issue for me. Because you see your country as if you're watching a movie of a train in a train wreck in slow motion. That's what it is like. We're seeing it going over the cliff, and we're all shouting, no, don't do that. But somehow, nothing happens. Why? Because the people who are being wrecked, young people, seem curiously indifferent. I had a sidebar conversation with Fela, and he pointed out something that was very useful for me. I said, when are young Nigerians going to come to terms with the fact that on the basis of their own enlightened self-interest, They have to capture back the state through political participation, through the nomination and the support of candidates like this. He says, well, for you to have enlightened self-interest, you first have to be enlightened. So the question now is, where do we start? It's a chicken and egg situation. We're rapidly going over the cliff with a whole horde of young people who are quote-unquote not enlightened. And it was deliberate. I mean, I have a historical sense of Nigeria. I've been writing about Nigeria for 40 years. So I understand it from a purely experiential historical perspective. Writing out the military as a young person, getting into trouble, getting arrested, we have the credentialing there, but we never get to the point where we have literally 87 million people poor. 120 million Nigerians under the age of 35. So you have this vast army of young people, and where and how do we switch? What will turn that switch? I think the key challenge for us here is really not to worry about the technical things that they're throwing about us. I mean, so I'm going to build you 10,000 kilometers of roads. I'm going to do this. That's not Nigeria's problem. Nigeria's problem is not technical. Nigeria's problem is adaptive. Nigeria's problem is not technical, it's not technology per se, it is psychology. So the question now is, how can we reset the mindset of Nigerians, especially young Nigerians, to the point where they can overtake this present narrative and create their own narrative? In many talks, I usually don't talk to young people. I always try to introduce time as a concept to them. Like, okay, we're looking at it within a space-time continuum. The past we know already. The present is fitting. The moment you say present, it becomes the past. But the future is what the philosophers call a tabula rasa. It's a blank slate. So the future of Nigeria is yet to be written. It is not a fait accompli that either Buhari, Atiku, or whoever those people from the class of 66 represent are going to be the president of Nigeria next year. Because it's the future, and the future is yet to be written. The question is, how can we harness the power of young people to make enlightened choices, to change this prevalent narrative? That's one challenge. The second challenge is, how do we expunge the culture of militarization in our mindset? We who grew up under the military and returned under the military understand that. But to see it manifest in a generation that had no direct contact with the military is threatening to us. How do you change and switch that mindset? One way you can do that is, as young people often tell me, is technology. I think technology might be one of the ways in which you can overtake. And, you know, by all estimates, I did some work last year, and the statistics were that by NCC, that 90 million plus Nigerians use the internet one way or the other. Mobile transfers, you know, young people are using it. And that Facebook has about 26 million and growing Nigerians. But 26 million people on Facebook as a community is larger than the next 3 countries beside Nigeria, Togo, Benin. So my own thing is, how can we use that part of technology? Because technology is going to be an intrinsic part of Africa's growth over the next millennium. Because you're talking about a young population who are all wired. Presently, across Africa, I think internet penetration is about 20%. It's probably going to grow with a low cost of data. So the question now becomes, if you have 26 million people on Facebook, that is a virtual country. So I want us to just expand the prospects, you know, and move beyond, as Pella would say, this goddamn contraption and get into the underground spiritual game. But the underground spiritual game here and now is technology. How can we look at Africa differently? How can we harness the resources of young Africans? And I'm saying that within the context of Africa being a continent and Africa being a country, as in Nigeria. How can we create the virtual republic of Nigeria, where all the ideas that we have can be debated, all the prospects, our dreams, our aspirations can be contested, and how can we use these tools to shape an alternative narrative for where we're going? Those are the challenges, I think. And I'm going to wind up. I'm going to wind up by suggesting that we go back to the master of all of this. One of my favorite Fela stories, and a couple of them, was many years ago in the US. A group of us went to visit Professor Chinua Achebe when he was at Bard College. He was just shortly after his accident. So we drove up the Hudson River, went to Bard College, and were ushered into Prof's house, which had been modified to allow his wheelchair. And there he was sitting in his living room, his wheelchair, with his black, tank top, and then his black beret, waiting for us. In the background was Fela's music, just blasting away constantly. So I could not reconcile Professor Chinua Achebe with Fela. It was just one of those crazy mind-altering experiences. So I asked Prof, why are you listening to Fela? The guy, is a very profound man. He picks his words. He said, why am I listening to Fela? He said, Fela is the sage of our times. Fela is, this is over 20 years ago. And this is what young people are just rediscovering. Before I leave, I'm going to offer some kind of a discography. If you really want to understand Nigeria's problem and Africa's problem, I suggest you do a couple of things. Forget Afrobeats. Go back to the authentic Afrobeat as represented by this gentleman. I'm looking at Overtake, the logo. Of infinity. That is infinity. That is Fela. His music can never die. Let me offer a discography for you guys, you young people who think that Afrobeat is a thing. Go back to the underground spiritual sound of Fela. And I'm offering a couple of tunes for you. One thing you have to watch is the documentary, Music is a Weapon. You have to watch that documentary to really understand that music is a weapon. I mentioned Uganda a while ago. If you ever have any doubts that music is a weapon, check out Bobby Wine in Uganda. If you ever had any doubts about the influence of Fela's prophecies as the sage of a time, talking about music being the weapon, go to Uganda and see what another musician is doing in Uganda, a young person trying to change things. You guys might want to borrow a leaf from him too, Bobby Wine. I think about 4 ones that just came out of my mind, tunes. You have to listen to why black man they suffer. I hope you're taking notes. This is not assurance. Suffering and smiling. Water no get enemy. And Africa center of the world. Thank you very much.
Every time Tuji talked about Uganda, my mind went straight to the president of Uganda. In 1992, having just finished youth service, I was on internship at Democrat newspapers in Kaduna. By the way, Democrat is issue. And African leaders came to Abuja for a meeting. The president of Uganda was then interviewed. They wanted them to talk about the Sith Titism. The Sith